Welcome. Today we will go to the place where the fate of aerial combat was decided, to the summer of 1943, when it seemed that everything was clear, but in reality, the deadliest secret of tactics was hidden. Why, despite years of training and strict rules, did American pilots lose hundreds of aircraft, while German fighters skillfully avoided their traps? How could a sudden idea of flying low, like a shadow, change the course of the war in the sky? And what lies behind this strategic revolution? Technology or an understanding of physics? Are you ready to hear how an unexpected twist in tactics shattered the established order and paved the way for absolute air superiority? Then let's begin. In the summer months of 1943, when the sun brightly illuminated the skies over Europe and the war reached new, unimaginable scales, air battles turned into a brutal theater of strategic decisions and deadly mistakes. At that time, American pilots in their powerful P-47 and P-38 fighters seemed to follow an established doctrine. They ascended to altitudes of 15 and 25,000 feet to drop bombs on targets and patrol the airspace, hoping to intercept the enemy in its own territory. Multi-layered clouds, cold wind, and endless altitude became their allies, or so it seemed then. Height gave an advantage. Height ensured safety. Height was the main weapon, the primary shield in air warfare, or at least that was the prevailing belief. At that time, German fighters Focke-Wulf FW-190 and Messerschmitt Bf-109 dominated this altitude range. They expertly used the dive tactic, a sudden attack where the pilot, hiding behind the sun's glare, dives down to hit the target and immediately disappears into clouds or beyond the horizon. These enemies knew all the nuances of aerial combat and used altitude as a weapon. They understood that at high altitude, it was easier to choose the moment to attack, easier to escape, and easier to hide. And American pilots, following their tactical canon, stayed at high altitude, believing it was the key to survival. But at this very moment, during the years when it seemed that all tactics had been refined to perfection, a disturbing thought arose in the air. Throughout the summer months, June, July, August, and September, the statistics relentlessly showed the same picture. The U.S. Air Force lost more than 200 aircraft, and most of these losses were not due to technical failures or pilot errors, but to German fighters employing precisely this high-altitude tactic. The losses were severe, the wounds deep, and the question that haunted command and the pilots themselves grew louder. Why, despite intensified training, tactical drills, and numerical superiority, the number of killed and destroyed aircraft kept increasing? Why, despite all efforts, does this high-altitude war seem doomed? At that moment, like a sudden spark, an idea was born: to abandon the old rules, to give up height as the main advantage, and to try flying low. At first glance, it seemed reckless. After all, low altitude means vulnerability. It makes you an easy target for anti-aircraft guns, enemy radars, and surprise attacks. But this new concept, flying low, closer to the ground, using its terrain and physics, became a revolution in aerial combat tactics. And immediately, one of the most astonishing features was revealed. German radar-based reconnaissance began to face an unimaginable problem. Their radars, so precise and modern, could not detect aircraft hiding near the ground surface. Radio waves used for monitoring the airspace reflected off terrain, rusty buildings, and trees, creating interference and distortions. This allowed American pilots flying low to remain virtually invisible. They disappeared from the German system's radar screens, becoming unseen, as if dissolving into the Earth itself. This particular trait, invisibility at low altitude, became the key to a new tactic that could change the course of the war. The realization that the high-altitude strategy, which seemed invincible, actually created vulnerabilities, was a turning point. Why had no one paid attention to this aspect before? Why did everyone think only in terms of altitude and combat advantage, ignoring the fact that it was precisely this altitude that made them weak? This is the main question of this chapter. Why did the traditional high-altitude combat tactics turn out to be deadly? Why did abandoning them, switching to low altitude, and using the terrain's physical features become an opportunity for new dominance in the air? And how, through understanding these nuances, could the course of the battle be changed, pilots' lives saved, and perhaps the entire outcome of the war turned around? The key to the answer lies in these reflections, in the idea that abandoning familiar rules, understanding physical and technical realities, is not weakness but strategy, in the idea that using terrain, invisibility, and surprise is a weapon that can outplay even the most prepared enemies. Could this abandonment of high-altitude tactics become the key to victory for American pilots? Could it change not only tactical arrangements, but also the entire course of the war? The question remains open, and it is precisely its answer that underpins this entire story, this struggle for air superiority, for the fate of millions. In a time when the war reached its peak, when the front spread in chaos and instability, and when technology and tactics constantly evolved, an idea arose in the air that could overturn all notions of combat strategy. On that September day of the 43rd year, beneath the shadow of massive battles and political intrigues, the commander of the 26th Group, a man named Zemke, made a decision that could prove to be pivotal for the entire aviation tactics. He selected 3 experienced pilots, Walker McCoran, Bob Johnson, and Jerry Johnson, those who had already earned trust through their skill, and assigned them a task that at first glance seemed risky, even reckless. They were ordered to forget about the usual high-altitude discipline, the standard rules of air combat, and to start flying low, very low, down to 200 feet above the ground. There was no time for jokes. War demanded new solutions, new methods, and Zemke, a man with an analytical mind and a knack for innovation, was convinced only this way could an advantage be gained. It was not merely an experimental mission. It was a challenge to traditional aerial tactics based on altitude advantages. Height provided better visibility, the ability to keep the enemy under control, to use long-range weapons, and to avoid anti-aircraft fire. But what if all these advantages were illusions? What if physics, speed, and maneuverability at low altitude could outweigh any height? That was the hypothesis Zemke proposed. He understood that flying low meant exposing oneself to danger, risking life, walking the edge of death. But he also knew, victory is born in danger, and in risky play, there is a chance to change the rules. On the day the 3 pilots took to the skies, the entire airfield was filled with tension. Walker McCoran, Bob Johnson, and Jerry Johnson each felt a mixture of excitement and resolve inside. In everyday life, these men were ordinary, professional. They knew their jobs. But today, everything was different. They took off, shed the high-altitude constraints of conventional rules, and began descending toward the ground. The sky shimmered with sunlight reflecting off the metal wings of the planes. The roar of engines echoed in their ears, and in their minds, only one thought: let's see what happens. And then, after a short while, what changed everything occurred. These 3 aircraft, dropping from 18,000 feet to 200, seemed to cross an invisible boundary between the old war and the new. They found themselves in a depth where the air grew denser, where every movement could be the last. But precisely there, on this dangerous frontier, the pilots saw and observed what had previously seemed impossible. In their field of view appeared German airfield structures, long rows of hangars, runways where cargo trucks rolled, and most importantly, groups of German aircraft, including the famous Focke-Wulf FW-190s. It was a discovery that could change the rules of the game. The enemy was unprepared for this, not ready for low-altitude flight, for pilots to quickly and accurately identify weaknesses in its defenses. Within minutes, as if by magic, the 3 P-47s dropped 4 bombs each on the enemy and opened fire from all guns. Part 4 of 14. German aircraft, 4 Focke-Wulf fighters, were destroyed before the German anti-aircraft gunners had a chance to raise their barrels and open fire. It was not just a tactical victory, it was a proof of concept that could change the entire strategy of aerial combat. The pilots returned to base unscathed, leaving behind enemy-destroyed aircraft. The entire Aviation Command Center was shaken. They observed the results, analyzing every second of this dangerous maneuver. And the evidence was irrefutable. The physics, speed, and precision of low-altitude flight surpassed everything previously accepted. The altitude advantages that once seemed insurmountable gave way to a new tactic that required courage and skill. There was no longer any doubt that the old rules had become outdated. Why stick to traditional methods when a new approach demonstrates such obvious benefits? The question became rhetorical. Who could oppose this? Who could stop those willing to fly on the edge of deadly danger to achieve victory? And it was precisely at this moment that the central conflict arose. Could risky low-altitude tactics, fraught with constant threat of destruction, provide air superiority? Could danger be justified if it paved the way to victory? This question encapsulates the essence of the new era of aerial combat. It is a struggle between the old and the new, between safety and heroism, between the familiar and the revolutionary. The question remains unanswered, but its solution lies in the hands of those willing to take risks, those capable of ignoring fear and trusting their skills. Because, upon deeper reflection, what if the entire war is not a struggle of forces, but a battle of ideas? What if future air battles will not be fought at high altitude, but at the most dangerous, lowest boundary, at 50 feet? This idea is not merely a technical experiment. It is a challenge to the entire existing order. And if it proves successful, if low-altitude flight becomes the new norm, then the history of aerial combat will need to be rewritten. Perhaps then, all air battles, both past and future, will take place not at high altitude, but at the most perilous, riskiest levels. And who knows, perhaps it is precisely at this level that the future of war is born. At the moment when war reached its peak, when technology and tactics intertwined in a brutal struggle for dominance in the sky, a new, almost magical boundary emerged. The boundary of invisibility, created not by magic but by the laws of physics and engineering genius. Imagine, in 1943, when the entire world community was still learning to harness the power of radar waves, German engineers and tacticians managed to break through the darkness of the unknown, using radar stations like Freya and Würzburg. These colossal installations, like the eyes of gods, could detect high-altitude targets at distances exceeding 80 miles. It was not merely an achievement, it was a challenge to fate, a challenge to everything that seemed possible. The Germans knew that if they could catch a plane at high altitude, they would be able to prepare an attack, intercept, or destroy it before it reached its target. This knowledge gave them an advantage that seemed insurmountable. But at the very moment when the observation gates opened, another, more hidden and treacherous force began its play: the physics of the earth and terrain. Radio waves flying at low altitudes encountered resistance, obstacles that seemed to be part of the very land itself. Trees, buildings, hills, ravines, all of these turned into invisible walls that distort and absorb radio signals. These ground clutter, like invisible traps, hindered radar from seeing targets, making aircraft invisible to the enemy. When a plane flew at low altitude, it seemed to vanish into the shadows, hiding behind the curvature of the earth, behind the terrain, behind millions of invisible barriers. Accounts from those years show that radar stations capable of detecting a plane 80 miles away became almost useless when the target was a low-flying enemy. Suppose a German fighter pilot is flying at an altitude of 18,000 feet. The warning time he receives about an approaching enemy is 3 minutes. That's enough time to prepare, change course, choose an attack or evasion position. But if the pilot is flying at 50 feet, it's only 11 seconds. There's practically no time to react. Evidence shows that such moments turn air battles into lightning-fast clashes, where every instant can be the last. American pilots who mastered low-altitude tactics suddenly disappeared from enemy radar screens. Their planes, like ghosts, dissolved into the terrain's shadows, leaving the enemy in darkness and unable to respond. This is not just a technical achievement, it's a revolution in tactics. Reaction times have shrunk from several minutes to fractions of a second. As a result, air combat ceased to be prolonged duels. It became lightning-fast kills, battles where speed and concealment became decisive. German pilots, armed with knowledge of how earth and terrain can hide them from radar, began launching sudden attacks, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. They seized the initiative, broke established patterns, making air battles somewhat unpredictable and chaotic. And so, in this context, the main question arises: how can technology and terrain, these two powerful factors, completely change the outcome of air combat? Can the advantages of physical properties of the Earth's surface, its obstacles, and curvature offset the technological superiority of radars and aircraft? This is a question raised not only within military strategy, but also in a broader context: the dilemma of the limits of human ingenuity and the power of nature. If the enemy cannot see you because the Earth becomes his invisible shield, can he even oppose you at all? Part 6 of 14. Or is it just an illusion, a disguise, a tactical trick? And what if this invisibility is not only physical, but also psychological? What if, thanks to knowledge of the physical properties of the Earth's surface, invisible traps can be created, concealed by terrain, and in that case, who would be the victor? These questions keep troubling the mind. The majestic interplay of light and shadow, technology and nature, it continues to unfold. Within this complex equation, where every advantage can turn into a weakness and every weakness into an opportunity, lies the main meaning. Ultimately, victory depends not only on machines and devices, but also on understanding the laws of the surrounding world, their application and manipulation. And in this lies a hidden, almost magical power capable of radically changing the course of war. So if the enemy could not see you, if he could not predict your actions, could he have even opposed you? Or perhaps the entire game is just an illusion, and the real struggle takes place beyond the visible, beyond the limits of familiar technologies and physical laws. The answer to this question is the key to understanding an era where earth and sky merged in an endless war, and victory was determined not only by weapons, but also by knowledge and the skill to use invisible, almost magical boundaries of physics. In the dark wings of night, when darkness engulfs everything around, and only the faint light of a distant city flickers on the horizon, a new era of aerial combat begins. At this moment, when it seems that everything has already been decided, something extraordinary happens. German pilots, standing at their bases, hear an elusive call of approaching aircraft. These are American hedgehoppers, silent shadows that move low and fast, seemingly like ghosts, at an altitude of just 50 feet. Their engines are barely audible, but felt as the approach of inevitable fate. In this moment, in this silence, a feeling is born that the destiny of combat bases is changing forever. These planes, like predators, hunt their targets not by traditional aerial duel scenarios, but by a completely different tactic. They do not fly high, do not engage in fierce battles in the clouds. They fly low, almost touching the ground, like shadows dissolving into the night. And it is precisely this that turns German bases into death zones. Here, on the ground, in hangar enclaves on runways, among warehouses, entire squadrons are destroyed. The reaction time has decreased from the usual several minutes to a frantic 11 seconds. In these brief moments, in these instantaneous seconds, something seemingly impossible occurs. Most aircraft are destroyed before they even manage to take off. This is not just a tactical advantage. It is a psychological attack capable of breaking even the most resilient defense system. German pilots, previously considering themselves immune to fear, begin to experience anxiety and panic. Their bases, once seeming impregnable, turn into traps. The reaction time, once sufficient for maneuvering, now becomes a mere illusion, vanishing in fractions of a second. Their resistance is virtually impossible. German aircraft, seemingly prepared and equipped with everything necessary for defense, are forced to retreat or destroy their own resources to avoid falling into the enemy's hands. American pilots use everything: ground, urban structures, and even the ruins of destroyed buildings, as cover and tactical points. Their attacks are not just relentless routine operations, but an art of surprise. They seem to vanish into the city dust and smoke, transforming from attackers into invisible foggy ghosts. Mastery is felt in every maneuver, and a well-thought-out strategy guides each movement, where the main goal is to leave the enemy no chance to react. And this tactic works flawlessly. German aviation and command begin to panic, trying to change the rules of the game. They introduce new schemes, seek weaknesses, strengthen defenses, but all in vain. The psychological pressure caused by this invisible threat becomes more powerful than any artillery or fortifications. And a question arises, louder with each passing day. How much can psychological pressure and physical tactics destroy a defense system? Can the enemy, relying entirely on scientific laws, physics, and stealth, break the opponent's foundations? Or is there still a limit to these methods? How long can one fight against invisibility, suddenness, and lightning-fast reactions? This is the core conflict of this era. Whether it's possible to win an air battle solely through tactical cunning and scientific principles, or whether there is an elusive factor, fear, panic, the weakness of the human spirit, that can destroy even the most reliable defensive systems. And suddenly, in this complex game of tactics and psychology, another question arises. What if the enemy cannot reach you at all? What if he becomes invisible, disappears from sight, and remains only in memory? What if invisibility is not just a tactical advantage, but the true victory? Could it be that in the future, in this war without front lines and fierce clashes, the winner will be the one who learns to disappear, who becomes invisible to eyes and sensors, who can move across land and air like a shadow, leaving no traces, causing no alarm or fear? This question is not just a hypothesis, it is a challenge to everything we knew about war, about strength, and about confrontation. Time shows that in battle, not only weapons but also psychology, intelligence, and the ability to become invisible can be decisive factors. And in this lies the essence of a new era of combat, where invisibility becomes a weapon and fear becomes our ally. Isn't this one of the greatest mysteries we must solve? And who knows, perhaps the answer to the question that torments everyone, whether the enemy, having become invisible, can forever evade a strike, disappear from sight, and leave the opponent completely bewildered, is hidden in this. In the distant 20th century, when the sky became a battleground for deadly combat and revolutionary technologies, one of the most outstanding and versatile fighters of World War II underwent astonishing transformations. This aircraft, originally designed for high-altitude aerial combat and strategic missions, found itself at the center of a complex game of modifications and tactical innovations that turned it into a deadly weapon for low-level raids. Could it have been possible, armed with advanced technology and engineering genius, to rethink the purpose of this high-tech machine capable of reaching great heights in the sky, so that it could effectively fight in conditions where the ground and terrain became its battlefield? This question not only lies at the heart of the entire story, but also reveals the fine line between technological perfection and tactical adaptation. The answer to it is not merely a technological challenge, but a mirror of engineering ingenuity, determination, and strategic thinking of military command. These are the kinds of transformations we are talking about. The fighter, destined to become a hero of air battles, was initially designed with the highest standards in mind. A powerful engine capable of generating incredible force made it a pinnacle of aviation engineering. Its core was the R-2800 engine, a giant capable of producing 2,000 horsepower, allowing the aircraft to reach speeds exceeding 350 miles per hour. This engine was not just a technical marvel, but the true heart of the machine, defining its capabilities. Its advanced aerodynamics, sturdy construction, and powerful armor all made it a formidable and invincible weapon at high altitude. But what happens when the same aircraft, forced to perform low-level attacks, faces harsh reality? At low altitudes, where the ground, trees, bridges, and bunkers all become obstacles, the powerful engine and aerodynamic shape begin to work against the pilot. damage becomes inevitable. Broken panels, damaged radiators, broken landing gear, all evidence that a machine designed for altitude is subjected to tests it was not originally meant to withstand. Each attack turns into a fight for survival, and every mission into a test of limits. That is when the search for solutions begins. In December 1943, as the war was already gaining relentless momentum, engineers and tacticians started implementing the first serious modifications. Half-inch armor plates began appearing on the bottom and lower parts of the fuselage. Not just armor, but a shield capable of protecting against tree branches, shrapnel, and small obstacles that frequently cause damage during low-level attacks. These metal plates, carefully and securely attached, made the aircraft less vulnerable, allowing the pilot to perform tasks with less risk to life. Small, seemingly minor improvements, but their impact was colossal. They transformed a machine that previously could barely withstand minor damage into a resilient fighter capable of breaking through forests and urban ruins without losing combat effectiveness. Simultaneously, the implementation of new targeting systems began. In 1944, engineers introduced the advanced K-14 sights, complex optical systems that allowed pilots to acquire targets with incredible speed and accuracy. At speeds exceeding 350 miles per hour, the ability to instantly orient and precisely aim became a key factor for success. There was no time for prolonged aiming, no room for mistakes, only instant reaction, precision, and decisiveness. These sights, as a result of cutting-edge technology, enabled the pilot not only to see the target, but also to quickly align the weapon, significantly increasing attack efficiency at low altitudes. As a result, even at high speeds and in challenging conditions, the aircraft became a deadly weapon, capable of delivering precise strikes on bridges, bunkers, and strategic targets. But engineering efforts were not limited to armor and optics. Serious modifications were made to the wing design, allowing for reduced stress during rapid takeoffs and maneuvers. These changes made the aircraft more maneuverable, an essential quality during low-altitude attacks, where every movement could be the last. Lightweight yet durable wings, resulting from complex calculations and new materials, enabled the pilot to control the aircraft more easily without losing speed or agility. They were designed so that the plane could perform complex maneuvers, dives, and evasive actions that previously seemed impossible for this type of aircraft. Time was not standing still, and engineers understood that to win, one had to think ahead. Therefore, tactics of gliding bomb strikes were developed, special maneuvers in which the aircraft, approaching the target at minimal altitude, dropped bombs, minimizing the risk of enemy fire and obstacles. These tactics demanded exceptional precision and the ability to read the terrain from the pilot. In conditions where every meter could be the last, the skill to quickly orient oneself and apply new techniques became an integral part of training. Navigation skills, terrain reading, rapid response, all these abilities turned into weapons that transformed weaknesses into advantages. Finally, the most crucial element of success was pilot training. They were taught not only to control the aircraft, but also to master shooting at high speeds, reading the terrain, and making instant decisions. In low-altitude raids, each pilot became a strategist, navigator, and gunner simultaneously. The idea was to surpass the limitations inherent in the original design and turn a high-tech fighter into a machine capable not only of fighting at altitude, but also of dominating on the ground, destroying the enemy from unexpected and deadly positions. And now the main question arises. Was it possible, upon seeing this powerful machine, originally designed for aerial combat at high altitudes, to transform it into an effective weapon for low-altitude, dangerous, and often deadly raids? Could technological complexity and engineering ingenuity make a high-altitude fighter into a low-level killer? The answer, hidden behind numerous decisions, modifications, and tactical innovations, is yes. This was not only a technical victory, but also a strategic concept. By leveraging all the possibilities of engineering progress and tactical thinking, it was possible to expand the role of a machine created for one purpose: to turn it into a versatile fighter capable of winning at any point in battle. And what role do such machines play today? What opportunities does their use open when the boundaries between high altitude and low-level combat are blurred? What prospects does modern military technology have when we look at the history of these transformations? The answers are not as obvious as they seem, but one thing is clear. The story of this aircraft is not just about technical modifications. It is a story of how engineering art, tactics, and courage can change the purpose of a machine, turning it into a weapon previously only dreamed of. And in this lies a lesson that remains relevant today. In April 1944, when the fate of World War II hung by a thread, when every minute could be decisive and any mistake a fatal blow, one of the boldest and largest operations of the Allied air forces was unfolding over Normandy. A time when the calm before the storm becomes especially ominous, and the risk unbearably high. It was during these hours, on the night of April 8th, that a group of 48 jet fighters, the fastest and most deadly in the Allied air arsenal, took to the skies. Their name was Hedgehoppers. Their mission was to deliver a crushing blow to German airfields scattered across Normandy's landscape, and the success of this operation could turn the tide of the entire campaign, shift the balance of power, and determine the fate of millions. The preparation for this operation was carried out in strict secrecy. Not a single hint or suspicion reached the enemy. The entire plan was based on surprise, on a lightning-fast attack designed to catch the Germans off guard. The pilots involved in the raid knew their main task was to slip through the clouds, reach targets at altitudes seemingly unfit for combat sorties. They flew at altitudes just above 30 meters, sometimes only 50 to 100 feet. The entire route was a treacherous, tense flight along the horizon line, where every movement and decision could cost them their lives. Within minutes after emerging from the clouds, as if struck by lightning, they reached their targets: airfield bases, command posts, technical hangars. It was this strategy, attacking at very low altitudes, that made the operation unique and simultaneously dangerous. Pilots had no room for error. At any moment, they could come under fire from German anti-aircraft guns, encounter patrol aircraft, or lose their bearings in challenging weather conditions. But it was precisely this tactic, swift, unexpected, almost invisible, that allowed them to reach their targets with virtually no resistance. During the entire 90 seconds of the attack, 11 German combat aircraft were destroyed, most of which were on the ground at the time, unprepared and not expecting an assault. The Germans, who had no time to prepare, failed to react. Their bases were left defenseless, lacking the combat-ready defensive measures. This short but devastating strike was not merely an act of destruction. It was a demonstration of power and efficiency through meticulous planning, utmost precision, and lightning-fast response. German commanders, accustomed to defensive positions and prolonged preparations, were caught off guard. Their reactions, confusion, disorientation, panic, are recorded in radio transmissions, which testify to how quickly and hopelessly they were cut off from the possibility of an adequate response. Evidence shows that German commanders, forced to watch their bases being destroyed in seconds, could not understand how it happened, how a sudden, low-altitude attack could be so precise and effective. The results of this operation were truly astonishing. In just 1 week, only 7 days, the Allies destroyed 47 German aircraft. It was a blow that not only reduced the enemy's air force, but also completely changed the strategic situation. The Germans were unable to redeploy sufficient forces to the front to oppose the advancing Allied troops. Their air defenses were demoralized and exhausted. Radio intercepts from Allied reconnaissance reveal that the enemy command was in disarray. Reports from German headquarters are irrefutable. They could not understand where this deadly stream of fire suddenly came from, how it pierced through their defenses as if an invisible knife. And here lies the main question. How could the tactic of sudden, low-altitude attack alter the outcome of a major operation? What is its strength? After all, bases are fortified, well-prepared facilities equipped with anti-aircraft systems, guards, and surveillance. But it was precisely this tactic, An attack in the blink of an eye, at the most inopportune moment, that shattered conventional defensive schemes, disabling even the most well-prepared bases. Surprise is a weapon that can be more powerful than any armor or protective system. The question remains open. Can such unexpected attacks destroy fortresses that seemed impregnable? Can they destroy the enemy's spirit, his strategic plans, his ability to respond? Or, more precisely, what if the enemy cannot even warn of an attack because it happens in the blink of an eye? What if the enemy, its commanders and strategists, cannot track the threat's origin, cannot assess the extent of the damage, and cannot prepare a timely response? What if surprise becomes their most terrifying enemy? This operation is not just a tactical success. It is a challenge to the very concept of defense. A challenge to the idea that every base, every fortress, every command post can be vulnerable if the attack occurs so rapidly that the enemy has no time to react or even understand what is happening. This is the deeper meaning of this operation. It is not only about destroying aircraft or airfields. It is a lesson, a proof that in war, victory is not only achieved through strength in numbers, but also through cunning, the pressure of surprise, and the mastery of lightning-fast actions. Time is both an enemy and an ally. It is an enemy because it allows the enemy to prepare, strengthen, and respond. But in this operation, it was on the side of the attackers because they used it against the enemy as a weapon that destroys everything in its path in mere moments. So, the main question before us is such a tactic possible in the conditions of modern warfare? Can a sudden attack based on a lightning-fast, low-altitude strike destroy even the best defended bases, disrupt enemy plans, and change the course of a major operation? What is the key to success? Technology? Training? The psychological readiness of pilots? Or the very idea of surprise? And most importantly, how does this influence the entire strategic concept of war? When the enemy becomes unable to respond because its systems and personnel do not even have time to understand what is happening. This question remains open, and the answer lies not only in historical facts, not only in destroyed airfields and lost aircraft. It is in how surprise, speed, and precision can change the rules of the game. This is the main essence of the entire operation. What if the enemy cannot even warn of an attack because it happens in the blink of an eye? And what if, ultimately, this very ability to destroy the enemy in a single brief moment becomes the key to victory in the bloodiest and most brutal war, where every second counts and the fate of millions can be decided in an instant? In the dark depths of aviation history, there are moments that seem like explosions in consciousness, unexpected, daring, and sometimes insane. They change the course of battles, challenge established rules, and force a rethinking of the entire strategic game. One such moment is the tactic known as hedge hopping, low-level maneuvers over ridges, low-altitude raids that initially seemed risky and nearly impossible. But it was precisely this tactic, tested through the fire of World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War, that became a key lesson for all modern tactics. The theme of this chapter is to summarize the consequences of this daring idea, understand what lessons were learned, and why they proved to be decisive in the victory. In June 1944, when Europe was still burning with the fury of war, the Allied air forces began widely employing a new tactic of low-level raids. They adapted it to their conditions, the terrain features, and their weaponry. At a time when air superiority seemed essential and high altitudes were almost sacred territory for pilots, it was precisely low flights that started to challenge this dogma. The core idea was to use the terrain as a shield, as a weapon, as invisible armor. The Luftwaffe, British pilots, and Soviet aces all understood. To win in the air, you need to confuse the enemy, evade their targeting, and make altitude irrelevant. There was something truly revolutionary in this. Previously, controlling altitude was considered the key to victory. During the war, British and Soviet pilots, Typhoons, Tempests, Ilyushin IL-2, mastered the principles of land as a weapon, so skillfully that their successes amazed the imagination. They dived under fire, hid behind hills and trees, turning the landscape into part of their tactics. The Americans, with aircraft like the F-84 and F-105, took these ideas and developed them further. Their arsenal included heavy bombers and fighters specifically designed for low-level attacks. They used speed, surprise, and terrain, everything that could confuse the enemy, making them blind and deaf to their own radars and sights. This tactic was not confined to World War II. In the post-war years, in hotspots like Vietnam and Korea, its effectiveness was confirmed again and again. In these conflicts, low-level raids became an integral part of combat strategy. The wars in Vietnam in particular demonstrated that speed, terrain utilization, and surprise are weapons stronger than any armor or air defense system. In these battles, pilots, like shadows, disappeared behind hills, dived under trees, and changed direction on the fly, creating chaos that the enemy could not predict. Their testimonies serve both as proof of this approach and as lessons for future generations. And now, in modern times, this idea has not only persisted but has become fundamental. The U.S. Air Force developed a combat aircraft, the A-10 Warthog, that is entirely based on the lessons of hedge hopping. This heavy aircraft, resembling a tank in the air, is not designed for dogfights with fighters. Its mission is to destroy ground targets, and its armor, armament, and tactical training are all built around the idea, not altitude, but armor and speed. It hides behind hills, dives into the terrain, using every inch of the landscape as cover. Its pilots know control of the space is not only about altitude, but also about what lies below. And it is this tactic that allows them to keep the enemy in constant tension, destroying their plans and changing the rules of the game. Studying these moments, it is impossible not to notice that the hedge-hopping tactic has changed the concept of air superiority. It was once believed that control of the heights was the key to victory, that altitude provided an advantage that could not be compensated for. But experience shows the opposite. Control over the entire space, including low levels, is where the true strength lies. This is the main lesson. Sometimes the most reckless approach is not only risky, but also the most effective. It is based on knowledge of physics, psychology, and an understanding that the enemy does not expect you to exploit their weakness. Ground, terrain, low flights. So, what does this imply? The question that echoes at the heart of every strategic analysis. Can an innovation that breaks traditional rules change the very nature of the game? Can audacity, grounded in knowledge and precise psychology, become a weapon for victory? Looking back at history, we see that this often happens. Wars are won by those who think differently, who are not afraid to take risks, and who are willing to abandon established dogmas and trust their own knowledge and intuition. And that is the main point. History teaches us that sometimes, to win, you must abandon all rules. Not because rules are unimportant, but because in critical moments, breaking the rules becomes the only way to come out on top. Hedge-hopping tactics exemplify this. They demonstrate that sometimes the most seemingly crazy approach is actually the most correct. They also serve as a lesson that in war, as in life, victory belongs to those who can think unconventionally, who are ready to abandon familiar frameworks and seek new paths. So, this story is not just about tactics or strategy. It is a reminder that sometimes the boldest ideas and riskiest decisions are precisely those that change the outcome of a battle. That what initially seemed insane can become the key to victory. And the main lesson is that, to win, sometimes you need to abandon everything that seems right and take a risk. Because ultimately, history shows that victory always belongs to those who are unafraid to face the unknown, who use knowledge and courage to seek new rules and perhaps even create them anew.